Okay, this morning for the prophecy update, I'm going to talk a little bit about Israel trip. Now, that will include both my Israel trip and Donald Trump's Israel trip. He kind of intruded on our time over there a little bit, and we've already forgiven him for that. I mean, the city was pretty much, the day he was there, I'll mention in a moment, it was locked down, and we decided to leave town. We talk, and I say this almost every week now, the convergence of events. I was thinking about this on the drive over this morning. It used to be that when I was preparing these prophecy updates, I had about 40 or 50 newspapers that I would check the front pages of, most days of the week. And I would get most of the information that I would need or I think would be relevant to share off of the front pages. That's changed. Now, frankly, I only have time to review 5 or 6 newspapers and a similar number of journals and magazines and think tank publications, because almost everything I see as I go through these newspapers is relevant to Bible prophecy and the things that are unfolding here in the end times. There's just been this convergence and acceleration of things that's just absolutely stunning. So I try to go, it's impossible for me to share it, and I do have time constraints here because of our volunteers. And I like to do a midweek update, but it just isn't happening because I'm still working a job. And this week, over the last 10 days, Pam and I have flown about 13,000 miles to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and back, plus the traveling around the country that we did while we were there. So I got up very, very early this morning, about 1:30. Fortunately, I'm still sort of on Jerusalem time, which would mean I got up at 8:30. So I guess I sort of slept in, if you count that if I was in Jerusalem, I would have slept in. So let's start off with something humorous. This is from a little theism cartoons. So it says in 1999, the guys are talking, one guy is, "Yay, a new socialist government got elected in Venezuela finally. The Venezuelans will be liberated from the capitalist pigs. I predict great things for that country." Then in 2009, "Yay, a new socialist government got elected in Greece. Finally, the Greeks will be liberated from the capitalist pigs. I predict great things for that country." 2012, "Yay, a new socialist government got elected in France finally. The French will be liberated from the capitalist pigs. I predict great things for that country." His friend responds, "Man, every single one of your predictions ended up wrong. Don't you think that means the way you interpret reality is not that great?" And the response is, "Did you just assume my gender?" And that's typical with what's going on. I don't have a lot about. It was kind of nice to be away from American politics. Israeli politics has always been a little bit crazy with their parliamentary system, but they're starting to seem very sane compared to what's going on in the United States. And again, here was the Fourth Circuit upholding the ruling that struck down Trump's travel ban. This is the Fourth Circuit. This is not the Ninth Circuit. This is the one based in Richmond, Virginia. The vote was 16-3. What they did was they had all the judges in the Circuit Court of Appeals. You have district court, then you appeal to the circuit court, and from the circuit court you would appeal to the Supreme Court. So what they did was they had what they call an en banc hearing, and that means all the judges heard because they thought it heard the thing. And the vote was 16-3 to support this ridiculous, idiotic lower court decision that clearly ignores the Constitution, ignores congressional statutes, and ignores the power of the president. It just so happens that the 16 judges who voted in favor of the decision striking down the travel ban were appointed by Democrats. And the 3 that dissented from that opinion were appointed by Republicans. So don't tell me that the courts are not important. And I hope President Trump gets busy appointing people. The other thing, this is the cover of Time magazine. The White House morphing into the onion domes of the Kremlin. It's really, I'm still waiting for proof that there was actual collusion. The Washington Post and the New York Times have been very dishonest in the way that they have reported on Jared Kushner's discussions with the Russians. He is not a subject. When you are under investigation by the feds, there is a thing, you are called a target, which means they're looking at you and they may eventually make you the subject of an investigation. And if you're the subject of the investigation, you may eventually have an indictment issued against you. Jared Kushner is not even a target of the investigation. There's no proof. And the attempts to bring down Trump are underway. They're unmistakable. You saw an example of that this week when John Brennan, the former CIA director, was interviewed or questioned before a congressional hearing. And the person asked him, they said, well, now, what, Mr. Brennan, former Director Brennan, what do you look for? What triggers an intelligence issue when somebody's contacting a foreign government? And he said, well, I really can't divulge those details. He goes, well, here, let me give you an example. And he used the video, the mic that caught Barack Obama telling the Russian foreign secretary, and I think Vladimir Putin, before the 2012 election, look, just give me some space. I have an election coming up. I'll have a lot more flexibility after the election. So, go easy on me, and then we can work something out. And he asked Brennan, he said, is that the kind of thing? And then Brennan says, well, that was between two heads of state, so it's different. And then he said, but I want an answer to my question. And Brennan just essentially said, I won't entertain a question like that. What I'm seeing is just, it is like there are two alternate realities. And listen, I want it to be clear. I'm not a huge Trump supporter. I've always said that I think, I want low expectations for him. I think that's the best way to do it. But the activity of the media and the left and a lot of Republicans and the way they're approaching this is just absolute madness. So, but that I think is indicative of what we can expect in the end times. I don't think, as much as I would like, unless there's this massive revival in America, this is going on in every country in the world right now. This insane political fighting. It even happens in the church. It's insanity. And but in the political realm particularly, it's just everybody's going back and forth. Everybody's running to and fro, and nothing seems to be making sense. And people are saying things on TV. It's just stunning. I continue every week. I think Tucker Carlson on his show on Fox does campus meltdown or campus crisis or whatever. He has a segment. And he had a professor on this week who was left-wing, a progressive. He said, I don't even vote for Hillary Clinton because she's too far right-wing for me. But they tried to shut him down at Evergreen State University, I think it's in Washington, because he's a white guy, and the students were protesting. And every day I hear stories about people trying to speak on college campuses, and they try to drown them out with sirens and bullhorns and shut them down. And so the fascists are the ones on the left. That should be pretty clear. But they're really ramping up their activities. So let's talk about Israel. I'm going to go through a little bit about the Israel trip. I want to play some clips of President Trump in Saudi Arabia. And so I'll tell you a little bit about what we did. To be honest with you, when I went in 1995, I took a 35 millimeter camera, and I took 850 pictures. And that was unheard of. I mean, 850 pictures. I mean, it cost, I think, I had to develop it when I got home. I think it cost me $500. This time I just took my camera. I have an older camera. I took my iPhone, and I took a thing that we have here at church to take some video with. And I know I took about 1,100 pictures on my iPhone alone. So I was trying to go through those. It takes a long time to go through 1,100 pictures, so I don't have a lot of pictures today. And frankly, of just a few sites that we went to, I could speak for 6, 7, or 8 hours without any trouble. Some friends graciously provided an apartment for us to stay in over there. And they also provided us with a guy named Joel Kramer, Kramer. If you go to YouTube and type in Joel Kramer Israel, you'll find great videos of some people that he took on a tour similar to us. But in our case, it was just Pam and I and Joel. And he took us into sites in Judea and Samaria. Now, a lot of people refer to that as the West Bank. Over there, you hear it referred to as the West Bank or the Palestinian areas. So I want this to be clear. I believe Israel is entitled to all of the land, particularly between the Mediterranean and the Jordan, all the way down through the Arabah to Eilat, and the Golan Heights, and maybe more territory than that. So if I slip up, because everybody in the world calls it the West Bank, I don't want to see comments on YouTube that I'm not referring to it correctly. I support Israel. I don't agree with everything they do, and I'll talk a little bit about that today, but I want it to be known, I may use the term West Bank. That does not mean I'm buying into the public narrative. I don't want to see any comments about that on YouTube that I'm getting it wrong. I'm using language so there's a lot of people that don't understand about Israel and their right to the land. So I just want that to be clear. Pet peeve. Don't accuse me of not supporting Israel. It's a good way to get yourself banned from the YouTube channel. You see this sign as you travel through Judea and Samaria. You will see a sign like this all the time. And the bottom part of that, of course, most signs there are in Hebrew, Arabic, and English, except the rental car return sign at the airport at Tel Aviv at Ben Gurion. It's missing, and there's no language at all, so you're going to have to wind your way around this maze of roads there. But we were able to get our car returned and catch our flight. But this is what it says. You're now entering this road leads to Area A under the Palestinian Authority. The entrance for Israeli citizens is forbidden, dangerous to your lives, and against the Israeli law. In other words, if you're a Jew, you cannot go into Area A legally. Now, as Americans, we can, but you need to understand that when you go into these areas, the police are, and again, this is what the common usage is. The Arabs who call themselves Palestinian, I know that they're of recent origin, but the Palestinian Authority controls the police and the military. There are no Israeli soldiers in there, and you're pretty much on your own. And throughout that entire Area A, I believe there is one hotel that you could stay in. But we went into Area A quite a bit. Now, it was locked down in a number of areas. The soldiers had checkpoints set up because the first day we were there, well, I'll talk about what we did the first day. We went to Hebron. And the interesting thing is that when we went, it's very Jacob and I talked a little bit about this yesterday, so I'll just give a quick summary. The requirements to take a tour group into these areas are prohibitively expensive. So as a result, these sites that are rich with Jewish heritage, culture, and biblical history are rarely visited. They are documented sites. Most of the biblical cities have been identified by archaeologists who went in there because they believed the Bible and they were able to find the locations and knew where they were supposed to dig. But still, in Israel, only probably 1% or less of the potential sites have been excavated. Even when you go to a large site, there will only be a little bit excavated. The other thing you learn is that Herod and Constantine mark some of the holy sites. Now, usually what you find at a site is that they're very tradition-oriented over there. Their memories go back thousands of years. So when a site becomes holy because of something like Mamre in Hebron, they will build something there. Then somebody will come in and take over the country, like the Greeks under Alexander, and they'll see that it was a holy site, so they don't understand the God of Abraham, so they'll put up a site to their gods. Then Israel would take it back, and they would put up, and then the Byzantines came in, and the Crusaders. And so you have these things built up layer by layer, but it's easy to identify the sites because there's a lot of layers of building that go on there. It's obvious that people think that it's a holy site. So Herod, when he ruled from about 35 BC to 4 BC, he marked 3 holy sites to Jews. Mamre, which is in Hebron, and I'm going to do much longer teachings on this at some point, maybe in some conferences that I'm going to do. But Mamre at Hebron, which you can read about in Genesis chapter 13 and 18. This is where Yahweh met with Abram by the great oaks of Mamre. You can go to the site, and our Joel Kramer showed us the places through the bedrock where the trees had grown. Herod built at Mamre because it was a site that was holy to the Jews. And though Herod was not a Jew himself, he was Idumean. He may have had some Jewish blood in him, but because of the way he ruled, he marked these sites because it would help him control and oppress the Jews a little bit better. And he was oppressive to the Jews. They had no love for him. But he ruled and controlled things in the land. This is the cave of Machpelah. This is the second site that he documented. And this is probably one of the best preserved Herodian construction sites. The stones that you see all the way up to where the flags are Herodian stones. They have stood there through earthquakes and everything at Hebron for over 2,000 years. The construction is unbelievable. Even today, it's difficult to understand how they constructed it. It's clear that he did, but he had to bring these massive stones in. And so if you want to know a little bit about how the Temple Mount looked in Jerusalem, which was the third site that Herod built at, look at the stones and the construction at Machpelah. And this is built over the cave that was purchased by Abraham, where Abraham, Sarah, Rebekah, Isaac, Jacob, and Leah are buried. There is no question that they are buried there. And on this side where you see the Israel flag, that is up there is a Jewish synagogue. Then there is a dividing wall. And throughout the synagogue, there are what they call cenotaphs. C-E-N-O-T-A-P-H, cenotaphs. They are memorials that have been constructed at some point and put there, and the Jews go there to pray. And there's a iron bar in front of it, sometimes a window. But when you look through, you see a window on the other side, which is a mosque, because they consider themselves, Muslims consider them to be sons of Abraham also, descendants of Abraham. And to a certain extent they are. They're the sons of Esau and Ishmael. And it explains a lot. Hebron is sort of the epicenter of the conflict between the sons of Isaac, the descendants of Jacob and the descendants of Esau and then Ishmael, who they intermarried. Ishmael, of course, was the child that Abraham had with the thing. So at Mamre, Yahweh visited Abram and gave him the promise of a blessing. Abram built an altar there, and Yahweh said, I will come back and see you in a year. And he comes back, Genesis 18, and Abram and Sarah are there with their tent, and God gives them the promise of a son, and Sarah laughs. You can go and stand in the place today where that actually happened. So Herod built there at Mamre, Machpelah, and at the Temple Mount. Now, a lot of the Temple Mount was destroyed or torn down, but not completely. The temple was destroyed, as Jesus prophesied. But this gives you a good picture of what the Temple Mount looked like. And if you go partway up, I don't know if my cursor shows up on the screen. It doesn't. It doesn't. No. If you go partway up, if you look to the right near the corner, you see where the you see like a bush or weeds growing out of the side of the thing. Go to the corner just a little bit to the left, about halfway up. What you see there is you see eventually the wall goes up and then it angles in. That's called a parapet, and that's a good clue that that is what Herod built. When you go in there, and we went to both the synagogue side and the mosque side, because what you see is that when you're, especially at Sarah's cenotaph, you look through to the mosque a little bit off to your right, and they have bulletproof glass up there. When you go over to the mosque side, you look through at the same thing at a little bit of an angle, and you see the bulletproof glass, and below the bulletproof glass, and I got a picture of it, but not in today's presentation, you see rocks and that type of thing, because the Muslims go in there and they throw rocks at the Jews that are praying on the other side. When you drive through Hebron, there's a no man's land, a lot of abandoned buildings, and we drove through that. That was Thursday. Friday they had riots in the places we were driving through, because Friday morning is prayers at the mosque. The hate preachers come out, they get everybody fired up, and they go out and they burn tires, cars, throw rocks at the Jewish settlers that live there in Hebron. And sometimes, Joel says, they throw rocks at my car. And Joel has what I would describe as a beater of a car. I asked him once at one point, I said, now, Joel, I'm not making any question about your car, but I'm just wondering if they have car washes in Israel. Because he just doesn't, he goes, if you wash it and keep it clean and it looks nice, where I go, they'll steal it. So, and they have little codes you have to enter on every car that you rent. So this is a very important historical site. We actually went up in no man's land to the Tell at Hebron. David ruled 7 years in Hebron. And from there, we went over to the Herodian. You may have seen it. It looks like a man-made volcano. You can see it from miles and miles away. Herod built this. This was one of his palaces. It is where Herod was buried. This is an aerial view of it, and there is, from that white building, there is you see the path that goes around and up? That's very, very steep. It is a climb and a half. And it was a hot sun, and the airline had lost my luggage, and I didn't have a hat. And of course, I forgot my hat anyway, so not having the luggage at that point was irrelevant. But in the hot Judean desert sun, I got quite a sunburn. Then what you do is you climb down through the middle there where the palace was, and then there's walkways down through the interior, and you come out here near the bottom, which is where they discovered in 2007 Herod's tomb. The man who looked for that for decades finally found it in 2007. It was verified, clear that this was a royal tomb, because royal tombs are usually in the palace. So, for example, in the city of David, where David's palace was, they found 9 royal tombs. They are certain, at least the Bible-believing archaeologists are certain, that they have found in the city of David, in Jerusalem, the tomb of King David. No question. Now, because of the conflict between the Palestinians and Israel, archaeologists, secular archaeologists today have made it their life's work to disprove what the Bible says. But trust me, this was Herod's tomb, and a few years later, this is very steep, and it's stories and stories high. the man who found the tomb was above the tomb on the path up there near the top, talking to a group, and he stepped backwards and he fell to his death right in Herod's tomb that he had fallen. That was in 2010. Very sad story. But very well documented site, and you can find some, and I'll talk more about this later. So that was the first day. The next day we went up to Shiloh, which is in the central mountains of Israel, what today they call the West Bank, but really in the region of Judea Samaria. I believe this is in the tribe of Ephraim's jurisdiction. And a couple of interesting things. Where that covered thing is a site that they are sure that this is where the tabernacle that Moses built in the wilderness was brought all the way through the time of the Exodus, in through the conquest, and brought to Shiloh, and it stood right there for almost 400 years. 400 years. 400 years ago, there was maybe a little settlement of Europeans at Jamestown, and that was it that was here in America. So that'll give you some perspective. It was there for 400 years. That's where Samuel heard the voice of the Lord. That's where Eli, when he found out what was going on and what his sons were doing, he fell over backwards, the high priest, and he broke his neck and died. Happened right there. The tabernacle was 75 feet wide. There are retaining walls around that area, and between the retaining walls, it's 77 feet. Is that just a guess then that the tabernacle stood there? And then you can see places where they would have put the poles drilled into the bedrock there. So documented site. The other interesting thing, this fascinated me. You see the hillsides behind? Those hillsides are all terraced for farming. They've been that way for thousands of years. But it's not just that hillside or that mountain. You can drive through the mountains of Israel for 20 or 30 miles, and every hillside from the bottom to the top is terraced for farming and vineyards and that sort of thing. Somebody lived in that land for a long time. Somebody was very agriculturally oriented. It's interesting, when they came back into the land, the hills that you would see at Hebron, off in the distance, they often look like this. They're barren. Well, when they came in at the time of the conquest, these were covered by massive pine forests. And at some point they complained, how are we supposed to farm this with all these trees? So just understand that it goes for miles and miles and miles of these terraces. Evidence that somebody was there in the land, even though archaeologists like Kathleen Kenyon will say, well, if the Hebrews were here, they were a small group of mountain people that just happened to build 1,000 square miles or more of terraces on steep hillsides. The textual critics deconstructed the text so people wouldn't believe the Bible. The archaeologists deconstruct the rocks that prove that the Hebrews and Jews lived there for centuries. So that's Shiloh. We then went up to Nablus, which is in Area A, and as you're driving into Nablus particularly, it's one of the main Palestinian cities, you see little street signs that are martyr memorials, and then you see pictures like this painted on walls or posters or whatever, and these are people. This is a picture of a suicide bomber who's honored throughout the Palestinian areas, and they put his picture up, and that's a picture of him taken either the night before or the morning of the bombing that he did to go in and kill Jews. And they still pay these people, the families, they pay money, they're honored, they name streets after them. I saw it with my own eyes. At Shechem, which is in Nablus, there's a couple things. There's Jacob's well, and there's the Tell at Shechem. Shechem is one of the most mentioned cities in the Bible. When you're there, this is Mount Gerizim. This is up near where the Samaritans live. Remember the Samaritan woman at the well? That house right there is the house of what I was told is the richest man in the West Bank. It's a massive mansion. You go to a city like Ai, there's nothing, the Tel has been abandoned because it says the city was never occupied again, and you see proof of that after Joshua destroyed it. I don't know what this man did to make money, but after driving around Israel for a lot, I would think that he either sold security fencing to the Israelis, because there's thousands of miles of security fencing everywhere, or speed bumps. He has the license to get money there's speed bumps all over the place. And I hit one, and not really well marked. You're driving through town, and all of a sudden, you're kind of airborne. I hit one at about 40, and when we landed, the windshield wipers and everything came on. But you see mansions like this all over this area, this Palestinian area. At Ai, there's a neighborhood of Palestinian homes, Arab homes, that rival some of the best neighborhoods in America, like in Beverly Hills. They're mansions. They're massive homes that you would only find in a few areas here in Columbus, Ohio. This is the Tel at Shechem. And I'm going to run out of time, so I got to speed this up. The Tel is there in the middle of the buildings. Mentioned in the Bible 60 times. To the right is Mount Ebal, to the left is Mount Gerizim. When Jacob took the city, he brought the children of Israel there to renew the covenant. And it's a natural amphitheater, so he put 6 of the tribes on Mount Ebal and 6 of the tribes, half people on Mount Ebal, half on Mount Gerizim. And on Ebal, they shouted the cursings that would have if they didn't stay faithful, and they shouted the blessings that they would have if they did stay faithful. It's a natural amphitheater, and it wasn't that there was a few people. If you look at the population of people of the Exodus, there might have been as many as 1.5 million people on each mountain, shouting back and forth. On the Cursed Mountain, they built an altar up there, but you can't go up there right now because of the conflict and everything. They've got it shut down. Jacob's Well is off to the left a little bit. The Samaritan woman would have been off to the right. And then a little bit to the left of the Tel, there would be Joseph's tomb. Remember, they brought his coffin back from Egypt, and that's where they would have buried it. Fascinating site. I have a whole bunch of things to say about that. But there is, in the temple area, became a temple area, they found a massive stone. And what you see is about 1/3 of the size of the stone. This thing, I would guess, would have been 15 to 20 feet tall. It says Joshua erected a standing stone there at Shechem. They're pretty certain because of the way it was buried, they had to chop it up into thirds. That's the stone that Joshua erected. Having seen it, I have no doubt. We went up to Mount Gerizim. That's where the Samaritans are. We saw where they, even today, the small community, about 700 or so, have their sacrifice on Passover. And they probably do Passover more biblically accurate according to the Torah than the Jews do. They worship the Torah. They study the Torah. They still write in a very ancient Hebrew script that has been confirmed down at Qumran from ancient scrolls. Very interesting area, and you can see where they do their sacrifice on Passover there in the center of town. Then we went to Samaria. Samaria is a very high up. Took Sennacherib when he came in the Assyrian invasion in around 721 AD. It took him 3 years to take Samaria because of the fortifications. And on the top up there, that area right there, that's where Herod also built 3 temples to Augustus, where they started emperor worship at the time of Christ. He was the emperor when Christ was born. Interesting that they started emperor worship at that time. And that's the temple. This is a picture. Here's a picture of it. Whoops. That's the Augustus temple at Samaria. Probably the best preserved of them. They have a sacrificial area. Steps up, they have a holy place and a holy of holies because Satan always imitates the true. And at the time of Diocletian, If you didn't worship the emperor from there until the time of Constantine, you were killed. So Herod built 3 sites, Mamre, Machpelah, and the Temple Mount. Constantine came in the early, about 325 AD, or Common Era, CE as some people call it, and he built at 4 sites. He built at Mamre. Why? Because that's where the blessing of the Messiah was given. I'll make a great nation of you. He built at Bethlehem. Why? That's where the Messiah was born. And these sites are all very well documented. And he built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is where Jesus was crucified, buried, and rose again. And he built on Mount of Olives, where Jesus ascended. Interestingly enough, there's a cenotaph to David where they have the upper room. In there's a 1st century synagogue. 1st century after the death of Christ. All synagogues, the Torah ark points to the Temple Mount, except that one. It points directly to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Why? That's where the first Christians worshiped, and they wanted to mark it and build it so it was oriented the right direction. So that's interesting. When we left Nablus on the way up to Samaria, we encountered this checkpoint. That's Joel, our guide, negotiating our exit from Samaria at the checkpoint. That's his website where you can find some really good aerial videos and teachings and resources and that type of things. Superb. Joel is a phenomenal guy. He stayed with us. His wife came over. They live across the river in Ammon for a while. But really knowledgeable guy, great ministry to witnessing to Mormons, was a pastor in Utah for a while before he went to Israel. Participated in lots and lots of digs, so he understands archaeology. When we came out of Nablus, the area was locked down. And we came through that, no problem. They just waved us in. But when we left, it was blocked. There were about 2 or 3 dozen cars and trucks waiting there, Palestinian guys, hanging around our car. Drive through, just drive through. They won't do anything to you. And they came out. Joel walked up to them. They had their guns raised, and he took our passports and said, we're just stupid Americans. And the leader of the soldiers there was an Orthodox Jew, and he said, why were you there? And he says, we went to Shechem. And the guy goes, all my life I've wanted to go to Shechem. I'm an Orthodox Jew. I'm not allowed to go to Shechem. It is a very important city to Jews. And he got a little emotional about it. He said, tell me about it. We were a mile away from the site. He's never been there. These are young men and women, probably 19, 20 years old. This was probably the most stressful time because, even when we drove through the checkpoint, they were, ready to shoot because there've been soldiers stabbed at that checkpoint. And there were a bunch of Palestinian men there, and it was a very tense time because the president was coming in. So he went to Samaria, went back to Jerusalem that night, and Bill Koenig stayed with us a couple days. He came for the Trump visit, and we were walking down the street in Jerusalem, and he goes, is that Mike Huckabee over there? And so we went over and talked to him for about 15 minutes. And he was gracious enough to let me take a selfie. He describes himself now as not the former governor of Arkansas, but the father of the current deputy White House press secretary. His daughter, Sarah Huckabee, is the female that you see when Sean Spicer's not around. So let's talk a little bit about what happened. I had a number of discussions with people, and Bill brought some people in. Maybe I'll talk about that some other time, but we sat in a hotel and talked for a few hours about what's going on. What's Trump going to do? We had trouble getting over there to where I filmed the Sunday update last week because they were doing helicopter practice in a supermarket parking lot there, and they had all the roads, like 20 roads down to 1 lane. So it took us an hour to go a couple miles. It would have been easier to walk, but there's a lot of speculation. What is Trump going to do? Is he going to move the embassy? Is he going to declare Jerusalem the undivided capital? You know, Trump had this itinerary. He went to Riyadh, then he flew to Tel Aviv, then went to Jerusalem, Bethlehem, then on to Rome and the Vatican, then on to Brussels, and now I believe today he's still in Sicily and should be coming home soon for various meetings. The NATO up in Brussels, and then the G7 are meeting in Sicily. I'm sure you've seen the pictures. First, he went to Riyadh. Now, there are other people who do prophecy updates, and there are people they have different views as to what happened in Riyadh and whether it was good or bad or whatever. And unfortunately, people are all fighting. Well, I agree with him. I agree with him. And we just have to see how this play out. But I had a little bit of time to sort of reflect on it over the week and read some things on the plane coming back. And I will tell you that I personally am bothered by the order of the trip. Trump went first to Saudi Arabia. Now, there was a reason for that. I'll talk about that in a minute. But look at the Saudi papers. Trump to seek premier Arab partnership. Saudi Arabia takes center stage. A new page as Trump makes a historic visit to Saudi Arabia. Over here on the right, economic expansion. Brand Trump holding up in Mideast despite domestic challenges. He has some hotels over in Dubai or United Arab Emirates. It's interesting. Obama, well, I'll talk about it in a minute. So he goes to this place in Riyadh, and they like to do laser light shows on walls over there. I guess that's becoming the thing. So this is what he did. He gave his speech, and there's one article there. U.S. Saudi Arabia find convergence on fighting terror, boosting GCC economic expansion. And so the Saudis are viewing this as the best time ever in American-Saudi relationships. And I'm bothered by that. It's consistent with what's gone on for years in Washington. The Saudis, I guess because they have oil and money, they get away with everything. And I'm bothered that he went there. And I'll play a little bit of his speech. Here was one of the first things he said when he spoke to all the 50 Sunni country leaders or so that came in.
I stand before you as a representative of the American people to deliver a message of friendship and hope and love. That is why I chose to make my first foreign visit a trip to the heart of the Muslim world, to the nation that serves as custodian of the two holiest sites in the Islamic faith. Our vision is one of peace, security, and prosperity in this region and all throughout the world.
Now, look, we know that this is what, I'm not saying this is the Antichrist or anything like that, but this is what the world is going to be pushing for. And he goes to one of the biggest country sponsors of terrorism. Current king helped fund Al-Qaeda, the Wahhabists. This is very troubling to me, and I don't like it. I'll be honest with you. I don't like some of the things he said about Islam. Here's a couple more clips.
Later today, we will make history again with the opening of the new Global Center for Combating Extremist Ideology, located right here in this central part of the Islamic world.
Now, it was interesting. There's no sound on this thing down at the bottom. So they went to this center, and a lot of technology and everything. Kind of, personally, I find it a little bit creepy, the grabbing of this orb, this glowing orb, and just the way it just looks creepy. And maybe it doesn't mean anything. Maybe it's highly symbolic. Some people think it's, proof that he's part of the Illuminati and that type of thing. And we'll have to see. But it was just very strange the way the lighting was. He continued with his speech.
America is a sovereign nation, and our first priority is always the safety and security of our citizens. We are not here to lecture. We are not here to tell other people how to live, what to do, who to be, or how to worship. Instead, we are here to offer partnership based on shared interests and values to pursue a better future for all of us. With God's help, this summit will mark the beginning of the end for those who practice terror and spread its vile creed. At the same time, we pray this special gathering may someday be remembered as the beginning of peace in the Middle East, and maybe even all over the world. But this future can only be achieved through defeating terrorism and the ideology that drives it.
Now, I'll give him credit for this. I mean, he actually mentioned God, but he didn't really distinguish between the God of, it was the God of the Abrahamic faith, and they're not the same God. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is not the God that the Nabatean moon god that's worshipped down in Saudi Arabia.
We now face a humanitarian and security disaster in this region that is spreading across the planet. It is a tragedy of epic proportions. No description of the suffering and depravity can begin to capture its full measure. The control of ISIS, if you look at what's happening, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas, and so many others, must be counted not only in the number of dead, it also must be counted in generations of vanished dreams. Saudi Arabia is home to the holiest sites in one of the world's great faiths. Each year, millions of Muslims come from around the world to Saudi Arabia to take part in the Hajj. In addition to ancient wonders, this country is also home to modern ones, including soaring achievements in architecture. Egypt was a thriving center of learning and achievement thousands of years before other parts of the world. The wonders of Giza.
And he goes on and talks about people want to go to Petra in Jordan and other places throughout the Middle East. He was right that this is a very troubling time. This is an article from Foreign Policy, and this is what I've said. And whether you agree with the orientation of foreign policy, I mean, it's a pretty broad range of political views there. But this article says what I've been saying for quite a while, I think, that Syria has effectively ceased to exist. We pretend that there's a country called Syria, but there's not, and how's it going to be divided up and what's going to happen? And so this was all taking place on Sunday while Bill Koenig and I and others were sitting in Jerusalem talking about what does this mean? You know, so I was doing a prophecy update from Jerusalem with Brian Schrager of JerusalemJournal.net and Bill Koenig of Watch.org. It's up on YouTube if you want to watch it. And this is going on down in Saudi Arabia, 1,200 miles away or so. And so I'm bothered by some of the things that Trump said. Because of time, I'm going to fast forward to the last part. You can find his speech at the White House YouTube channel. Let me just play the last part or two.
Of course, there is still much work to be done. That means honestly confronting the crisis of Islamic extremism and the Islamicists and Islamic terror of all kinds. We must stop what they're doing to inspire, because they do nothing to inspire but kill. And we are having a very profound effect if you look at what's happened recently. And it means standing together against the murder of innocent Muslims, the oppression of women, the persecution of Jews, and the slaughter of Christians. Religious leaders must make this absolutely clear. Barbarism will deliver you no glory. Piety to evil will bring you no dignity. If you choose the path of terror, your life will be empty, your life will be brief, and your soul will be fully condemned.
It's interesting, and this is very different from Barack Obama's speech in Cairo. His first major foreign policy speech also was to the Muslim world. He didn't speak in nationalistic terms. He spoke in terms of religion and civilization, which I think was interesting. And in the clip just before this, he said, "Drive them out," which is has a particular meaning to Muslims, because they're always talking about driving out the infidel. So in some respects, his speech was very bold, but I'm concerned about, and look, I know he's not a pastor, I know he's not a theologian, and I know he's not a Bible prophecy expert. So, but I see the way it lines up, and it seems to be lining up with Bible prophecy, that the leader of currently the world's most powerful country goes and talks about uniting all religions against this ideology in a place where the ideology is funded and has a lot of its modern roots, even though it's been like this, that religion, for all times. It's a very interesting thing. He concluded with this.
In that spirit, after concluding, Myra's in a fabulous place that we're at today, Riyadh, which I've gotten to know so well in so short a time. I will travel to Jerusalem and Bethlehem, and then to the Vatican, visiting many of the holiest places in the three Abrahamic faiths. If these three faiths can join together in cooperation, then peace in this world is possible, including peace between Israelis and Palestinians. I will be meeting with both Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Palestinian President Abbas. Starving terrorists of their territory, of their funding, and the false allure of the craven ideology will be the basis for easily defeating them.
Well, so he went on, and even the New York Times noted that, so he was there in Riyadh, and Monday he flew into Jerusalem, or to Ben Gurion, then came down to Jerusalem for some meetings, went to the Western Wall is the more proper term. Went to the Western Wall, prayed there. His son-in-law and daughter went there. Melania, they went over to the female part separately from him. That act was very offensive to the Palestinian Arabs. They've been fired up and rioting, and Area A has been closed down quite a bit since, and burning tires in streets and cars. And the New York Times noted that he was stressing the deal with the Palestinians. But then look at this in the article from the front page of the New York Times. He arrived on what was believed to be the first open direct flight to Israel from Saudi Arabia. Now, he could not have gone the other way. He could not have gone to Israel first, which he should have, because the roots of the Abrahamic faith is much older there by over 2,000 years. I mean, Abraham was in the land about 2150 BC. It was not until 620 AD. So that's almost 3,000 years, but he went to the new one first. And I'm troubled by the order. But I'll be honest with you. Now, I know as a practical matter, he couldn't have gone to Israel and then flown from Israel to Saudi Arabia. They wouldn't have permitted it. It was a huge statement that he flew from Saudi Arabia to Israel. When he came to Israel on Monday, Pam and I decided they had everything shut down in Jerusalem. So we got up And I said, let's go for a drive. So we drove down to Jericho, and it's down to Jericho. From where we were in Jerusalem is roughly 3,000 feet above sea level. Jericho is about 850 feet below sea level. And Pam said, how's the gas doing when we got to Jericho? And I said, I haven't had to press the accelerator because it's downhill all the way. It's only about 10, 11 miles as the crow flies. And we were one block from the old city. And it's down. And the other thing that's interesting about the geography of Jerusalem, we were up by the municipal building. We walked up a little bit, pretty much level with where the new gate was, downhill to the Damascus gate. And then you get in the old city, and it's downhill quite a bit from the Damascus gate, which is already downhill, till you get to the area of the Western Wall, the Kotel, and the Temple Mount. So when you approach the Damascus gate, you see the Dome of the Rock just above the city wall. So the Temple Mount is not the highest place there. It looks like that because there's a valley on many sides of it. So we decided that what we would do is, while Trump was visiting, they shut down the old city, essentially. So we couldn't do anything in Jerusalem, so we drove to Jericho, up through the Jordan Valley, past Beit Shan, up the east side of the Sea of Galilee, up into the Golan Heights, went along the Syrian border, right there where ISIS is, and Kenitra, the no man's land between Syria and Israel. And there you're probably, maybe a little over 20 miles from the outer suburbs of Damascus, about 30 to 35 miles right to the heart of Damascus from where you're standing. And you've seen a lot of pictures of it, and it's a very interesting area. I did turn on a road, which I thought was the road, because of the border and the war and no man's land. The roads kind of go at weird angles, and I went down this road, and when I got to like a gate that was open and a stone wall, and then it dawned on me, I'm probably not going the right way, because it wasn't registering on Google Maps. And I remember seeing a UN sign, so we were about ready to go into some of the old no man's area there. So we backed up and got out of there. That probably was not a good thing, but Trump went away. So we went up, drove along the Lebanon border past Tel Dan, over to Kiryat Shimona, then up over the mountains to Nahariya to see some friends for dinner. They happened to be, had immigrated to Israel from Manchester, England. And it was on the way back that when we got back to Jerusalem, we found out that the terror attack had occurred in Manchester. And the reaction of the British people has been typically weak and bad. And it's just, it's very sad. And they had talked about the Islamic influence in Manchester. We had talked about that at dinner. It's a weird time. So Tuesday, we were going to go to the Yad Vashem, but Trump went to the Yad Vashem. We thought, well, after he leaves, we'll go to the museum, right? The Holocaust Museum. And they had it shut down all day. So we couldn't go, so we did some things in Jerusalem at Friends of Zion Museum, which is pretty nice, but it kind of misses the biblical heartland in its exhibits. And then we went to, we went someplace else around Jerusalem. I don't know, we did something else. So Trump came, he went to Yad Vashem. There's also this attack in Egypt where the Islamic State killed 29 Christians. So on Wednesday, we took the light rail out to the Yad Vashem. It's a very oppressive, angering place. As you kind of descend down into this triangular hallway, and then you kind of cross back and forth to all these rooms that have exhibits of just I got to a place about midpoint down that hallway where I'm like, why did they let any Nazi live? The stories, the videos that are there, you can find them online at yadvashem.org, are just absolutely heart-wrenching. But then at the end, after you've gone through this oppressive thing, and you go past the hall of names, what you do is you walk up a ramp. You descended down, and now you walk up, and you get up to the ramp, and you have this beautiful view of the suburbs of Jerusalem. It's it'll tear you up. because of the depravity and the depths of suffering and horrors and evil of the Holocaust. But then you walk up and you see a city teeming with life. And it is teeming with life. We drove through an Orthodox neighborhood, and I'm sure in a kilometer we saw, I mean, in 0.6 of a mile, I have no doubt we saw over 100 baby strollers on the one street that we were on. I mean, and hundreds of little kids. I mean, we went out to one night, that first night we went to get something to eat on Jaffa Street, and goodness, every Orthodox Jewish couple that walked by had a baby. Every single one. So it appears that they're not just, as they say, studying the Torah. Then we went you go through the Hall of Remembrance and you go out, and that's where the Trumps were to put a memorial wreath just the day before. And you could see it when we walked through this place on, that's not my picture, by the way, I'm not that good. But that's what we saw when we walked out through the Hall of Remembrance. Fascinating place. But the palate cleanser for this is what we saw when we got to Jerusalem, because it's Jerusalem Day. 50 years from the founding of reunification of Jerusalem. And we've just been through the horrors of the Holocaust, and then we see this on the street. And then the couple selfie guys come here, and but it was, and you saw this all over Jerusalem, these parades. And we went over to the Western Wall, and we saw what was going on over there. We went in; they had dignitaries coming in through the Damascus Gate, and all these cameras set up. Nobody got up when we walked through. They didn't want to take our picture, apparently. They were waiting for somebody. It was a big celebration. We went over to the Jewish Quarter, and in the Jewish Quarter, this is the Arch of Titus. You see the menorah there. They took that model and they built a golden menorah for the next temple. And it's right there near, overlooking the Hotel Plaza, the Western Wall Plaza. I'm going to guess that, I put her picture there for a little perspective. I'm going to guess that I'm going to guess it's 7 feet tall. It's not solid gold, but it's made out of all gold. Couldn't be solid because the metal's too soft, the branches would droop. It's interesting, we walked around, I did an update, we recorded something, but we lost the video, Brian Schrager and I. And UNESCO comes in and says, Jews have nothing to do with Israel. And listen, I'm also bothered by the fact that Trump, as far as I can tell, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure you will, never used the word Israel, except maybe one time early on. He said Jerusalem, and the White House feed had Jerusalem, Israel when it was broadcast live, but now it just says Jerusalem. And this is the same sort of nonsense that the Obama administration did. I don't like it a bit. I think the people that work for the State Department must have an Israeli lobotomy when they get in there. So UNESCO says no evidence of history. This is the Mount of Olives, and this is a thousands of years old Jewish cemetery, and they say there's no presence of Jews in the land. Those are all Jewish graves. We walked through the Arab graveyard. So over there on the eastern wall near the closed gate, walked around the city. Great time. Lots of things. This was the Damascus Gate, or the Lions Gate, where the soldiers came in 1967. And I'm out of time, and I got to finish up. So listen, look up Caroline Glick, MelaniePhillips.com. They have great articles about what's going on, a good analysis of what's going on. Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney had excellent interviews every day this week. You can pick up a lot of that information. And this is it was wonderful to be there. It is very faith-affirming, but you are struck by the division in the land. and you understand the calls for peace, and the world, this is like the focus of the world's concern about peace. Syria is melting down, but what is Trump talking about? Peace with the Palestinians, peace in Israel. This is Bible prophecy unfolding right in front of our eyes. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for the opportunity we had the last couple of weeks to be in Israel. Lord, I pray for that you will fulfill, cause to be fulfilled Bible prophecy exactly as the prophets said, to your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.